All right. Hello. Welcome back to CKLA Chats. I am DLC Sarah Foster Yankee, grades 4 and 5, and this is my co-host.
Ashley Giles, also for grades 4 through 5, district literacy coach for Team 3. Both of us, Team 3. Yes.
Yes. So today we are in Unit 6, Contemporary Fiction, and this is Lesson 5. We are talking about figurative language, your story of aspiration in the house on Mango Street. Right. So our text for this lesson, there are 3 of them. We're going back
Share
to
your screen.
vignette.
Share your screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm actually on my.
It's okay.
Thank you for letting me know. Wait, is this the right one? Hopefully, this is the right tab. Nope. All right. All right. Let me get myself together. Go back. Present. This one. All right. There we go.
All right.
All right. So we have vignette 1, going back to the house on Mango Street. 2, my name, and 3, which we just read in the previous lesson of Smart Cookie. And students are going back and rereading these vignettes today because they are rich in figurative language. So the work that you'll see students doing is they're going to explore how figurative language conveys meaning in the house on Mango Street.
And I just love, since figurative language is a review, so why not perfect way to review figurative language is with a familiar text, right? Nothing new. We're going to go back to the vignettes we've read before. And so for this lesson, for lesson 5, we start off with reading. It's only 2 components this time. You have reading and writing, but reading specifically is very, very intense. It's heavy. You can see that right now. We have 4 components within the reading component, totaling 65 minutes in total. So to start off, we'll start off with the first tab, review of figurative language. And basically that's what it is. Remind the students that, of what is figurative language. And when we talk about figurative language, we're talking about similes, we're talking about metaphors, we're talking about personification. These are the ones that they focus on in this unit. They talk about similes, they talk about metaphors, and personification is what they really focus on. And so the 2 you want to review, because personification is something we're going to teach them within this lesson, but the review components are going to be similes and metaphors. So a good way to check for understanding, you should see the teachers asking them questions. It is, if it's a simile, do this. In our teacher's guide, it says, raise your hand if it's a simile, and if it's not a simile, they'll keep it down. So however the teacher wants to check for understanding, if students understand the difference between similes and metaphors, they can choose how they want to do it, just as long as you see the teacher reviewing similes and metaphors with their students. And then after you go ahead.
I'm just going to interject real quick because I did make a note to myself for this component that this is not meant to turn into like a lengthy mini lesson. You ask the evaluative questions and you do that check for understanding and you move on. Like this is not a figurative language. You're not teaching figurative language. You're just reviewing.
Yeah, and that's why it's quick. And then you direct them to activity or writer's journal 5.1. After you just ask that question, the CFU, check for comprehension, then you say, okay, we know similes and metaphors. Now let's complete activity page 5.1. And it says you may want to do the first one with them, but that's what I would do. They should know similes and metaphors by now. Like Sarah just said, it's quick, 10 minutes total. And so students will basically complete activity page 5.1. And it's just talking about similes and metaphors. And they're telling you what's the real meaning, the literal meaning, and if it's a simile or a metaphor. That's what they're doing for this first portion. And that'll conclude the first component within the reading component. So review of figurative language.
Yeah, and I do like, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I do like the challenge there because we know we have students at different levels. So you will have those students who like really have a strong grasp of similes and metaphors. So they'll finish this in like no time. So they do have a challenge there that if they finish that and they have time left, that they can create their own simile and metaphor. So that's a good extension for them. while you
Right.
may be circulating, needing to assist other students.
Yes. So then that takes us to part 2 of the reading component, which is figurative language in vignette 1. So they're going back to the house on Mango Street. This would be for 25 minutes, whole group. You're going to inform your students, we're going back to vignette 1. We're going to reread, but this time, what's going to be our focus? Our focus is these vignettes are very rich with figurative language. So we're going to look at the figurative language in vignette 1, which is house on Mango Street. And they're only going to look at a couple sentences. So they're not going to look at the text in entirety. The teacher's going to direct the student to look at paragraph 5 and look at lines in paragraph 5 describing the house. And they're going to focus in on the windows, the windows portion. Windows so small you think you were holding your breath, right? And so you're going to focus, you should see the teacher focusing in only on that particular portion. And you're going to have students raise their hand and answer, or, say like, wow, this is a weird or different way to describe a window. And so basically the teacher is getting into that personification piece, okay? How the window, this breathing, and remind students that, and we're reminding them that this is personification, but now we're just focusing our lens a little bit more on personification. So that is a great starting point for the teacher to look at vignette 1, at paragraph 5, where it shows, explicit, this is personification here. You're asking the students, how do you know it's personification? What is it? And they're going to tell students you want to explore this image of the window together. So basically, you should see the teacher really digging deep into why this sentence in this paragraph is an example of personification. Meaning, have some students do some movement. Tell them to take a deep breath and hold it for as long as they can. Tell them that they can watch the person next to them. Ask the students to stand up if they think holding their breath is uncomfortable. So you're showing the students that these are human traits, right? A window is being a human trait. So you should see teachers really focusing in on just this one line to help them understand that context, or, understand what personification is. The teacher should be asking some evaluative questions. What other words would you use to describe how you felt when holding your breath? Why do we need breath? So basically, teacher really, like I keep saying, focusing in on this line to help them understand what personification is. Taking it back to Esperanza, teacher should be asking questions on, do you think Esperanza literally meant the windows were so small? So you're slowly guiding the students to see that this is personification because it's an innate object being used as if it's something that's human.
Yeah.
So it's a process, right? So the teacher should be following this specific process on helping the students understand what personification is. Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think looking at the those specific questions that the teacher is asking is not, now that they're able to identify it as personification, they're also looking at the craft of it. Like, why would the author use this figurative language? Like, what is she trying to convey by personifying the windows? So like you're taking it to another level of rigor.
Yeah. So if you just hear a teacher saying personification is this, and they're not referring and asking these questions and digging deep, like increasing that rigor, then
they missed the point.
It's not going to be as effective. Absolutely. Right.
Missed the point of the lesson. It's not about just personification. It's why.
Yeah. Right. The author's craft. I like how you said that. And then after you have done that, taking it back to why they use it, how does it make the characters feel, all that, digging deeper into personification, then they will go to activity page 5.2 in the writer's journal. And this page focused solely on personification. So just like they did with the Similes and Metaphors, now after your explicit teaching and guiding through what is personification, they have an assignment similar to the Similes and Metaphors, but this was about personification on 5.2. So you should see the students. Hopefully they are successful. Here's a good point. If students are successful on activity page 5.2, it's a good indicator that that teacher did well explicitly teaching that one line from vignette 1 from the house on Mango Street about the windows. So teachers, this is going to help teachers, even teachers can evaluate themselves. Did I do this well? Because my students should be successful on this activity page.
Yes.
So as students are completing activity page 5.2, teachers providing support when necessary, actively monitoring, pulling small groups if need be. Then that ends our second component. Now we're going to move into figurative language in vignette 2. So last time we focused on vignette 1, now we're on vignette 2. And this one is my name. So they're going to go back to the vignette titled My Name. And now the teacher is going to direct the student's attention to the third paragraph. It's very explicit. It's stated explicitly where the teacher needs to take the students in order for them to get the concept of figurative language. And I put on my notes here, this is going to be in the graduate release, this is your I do and your we do portion for this section. And remember, for reading, you have multiple I do's and we do's, you know? So teacher gonna direct the students to the third paragraph. And she's gonna talk, it says, talks about her great grandmother threw a sack over her head and carried her off just like that, as if she were a fancy chandelier. So you're gonna focus in on this chandelier. Teacher posing questions. What is a chandelier? This may be something our students don't know. So we're gonna have to give them that background information. So it has to check her understanding. What is a chandelier? If she were a fancy chandelier, is that a simile or a metaphor? So you see how it's spiraling all the way back into how the, going back to the figurative language from the first and the second components. Then you're gonna talk about, okay, what's being compared? Teacher posing these questions. What's being compared? What is compared to what? So they need to know that the grandmother is being compared to a chandelier. So now more so on the metaphor versions and similes versions. It also says point to the phrase threw a sack over her head. So it's telling, so my main point I would like to tell leaders is that our teacher's guide explicitly tells the teacher what teaching points, where they want students to look in order to see if they have a good understanding of figurative language. Mm-hmm. So then after we talk about the chandelier, you're going to direct your students to 5.3, and you'll see a chart, a graphing chart. And we've already established that they're talking about grandmother, and they're comparing her to a chandelier. And so what the student is supposed to do on activity, I don't know, see if you can switch over to the formative assessment so we can see it. Students are going to be working in pairs, and that'll be that one right there in the middle. Those two, it's actually all of them, and I'll talk about each of them. So the first one is the 5.3. Students are going to be working in pairs, and they're going to look at the chart, and they're going to write down the ways in which you think a chandelier's description compares with the grandmother's. For example, under the grandmother, next to A, chandelier is an object, write down in what way is the grandmother like that object. So they do have an example provided, the first one. So the chandelier is already given. So how was the grandmother like a chandelier? Well, they threw a sack over her head. The text says they threw a sack over her head. The second one, a chandelier is an object. So what evidence from the text lets you know that a chandelier is an object? So all the ways in which you can compare or say what a chandelier is like. And so the students are going to put in quotes directly from the text that shows a chandelier is an object or a chandelier is fancy. What from this vignette shows you that a chandelier is fancy? So they're just basically citing that text evidence from this vignette that explains the meanings, the different meanings of the chandelier. If that makes sense, Sarah, you want to add something to that?
No, I was just thinking about, wow, the comparison of the great grandmother to a chandelier and how she is like an object. That is, wow.
So the students, so all three of these activities, you're going to be comparing different things. But so for this, we're just going to focus on 5.3, which is the first one. You're comparing the grandmother to the chandelier. In which ways though? So basically, what's that evidence that shows that the chandelier that is fancy? So how was the grandma fancy? Right, like the chandelier was fancy, right? So they have to find that evidence. So this may be kind of tough. Um, yeah, and basically that's what they do for this portion. Complete this chart. Okay, if we can go back to the previous slide. And note to our leaders, they do have the answers. I mean, if teachers are struggling, I mean, this sheet is blank for students, but the teachers, it's here. Chandeliers are objects. So answers are provided for teachers so they can help to guide the students. Students should be able to share their answers. So after they complete the chart, have them come back, have a discussion. So this would be great for teachers to anchor that chart you just saw in your classroom. So that students are, when they come back together, whole group, and they share, you're also jotting down those answers as students are sharing what they have. Yeah, pretty much that concludes the third component for Vignette 2. Now we're going to move into figurative language in Vignettes 2 and 3. And so my notes I put, now we're going to dig a little bit deeper. If you notice, it starts off very simple, Vignette 1. Then we're talking about the grandmother and the chandelier in Vignette 2. Now we're going to dig a little bit deeper. Remind students that in the previous activities, the teacher should remind them that they have taken what seems to be simple sentences and they found that it's a lot of complexity in these simple sentences. And that's why it's very important for the teacher to really explicitly use only those sentences that the book tells us to. Because one sentence, so robust, okay? The student's going to, it says instruct students to continue to work in pairs, so they're still working in pairs. One student will look at another phrase in my name and they will sit their sadness on their elbow. So again, they tell you what phrase to look at in the vignette. So in their pairs, one student's going to look at my name, the other student's going to look at Smart Cookie. So one is looking at Vignette 2, one student's looking at Vignette 3. And it tells them, so teachers, make sure your teachers are explicitly telling them what line to look at in those vignettes based on who's looking at what. And then now they're going to go to activity page 5.4 and they're going to complete a chart again. This chart is now talking about metaphor or simile. And so basically, let me turn to the sheet.
Oh,
or am I on 5.
Yeah, you're on the 5.4.
Yeah. Yeah, so now we're focusing back on similes and metaphors. And remember, they're looking at a specific quote from the text. So leaders, make sure students should know which vignette they're looking at. Partner A is on Vignette 2. Partner B is on Vignette 3, and they're going to complete this chart. Thinking about the phrase sitting on an elbow, what does that look like? Where would that person be? And so basically, they're going to have to explain, what does this mean? So they're going to answer these questions. So they have guiding questions that they have to answer based off this sentence alone, this direct quote alone. They have to answer questions. They have to identify if it's a simile or metaphor and then dig deeper into the meaning, the author's craft of it, basically.
Yeah, there is a note in the curriculum that if you're working with ELLs, that that my name would be an easier excerpt for them to work with because the metaphor is simpler. So
then at the end of this, they're going to share their responses with their partners and teachers, of course, actively monitoring, like providing that support, like you just said, Sarah, and let the kids know that they did some challenging work today, and it's only going to help them to become better readers. And that's it. I mean, they're just sharing their responses, and that's it. Heavy work. This is deep.
It is deep, man. Very deep.
And so depending on your teachers, they may need, some supports. I mean, use those supports on the side, pull those small groups as needed for sure.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's move on to writing. There is one part to this component. Students are going to be independently preparing to write a story. They're going to be working on that for 25 minutes. The teacher begins the lesson with a check for understanding. Um, she's having students raise their hands. Who recalls the main theme that we've looked at so far this week? Then calling on a student to answer. If they don't clearly understand the theme of aspiration, the teacher is stopping and clarifying on this point before moving on, because it's really important that they understand the theme of aspiration because the story that they're writing is going to include that theme. So the teacher's explaining that they're going to use what they've learned to write their own stories of aspiration. They're going to be using Writer's Journal 5.5. Yes, I have it here. So the teacher is basically going over the directions, making sure the students understand the assignment, that they're going to decide if they want to write a nonfiction or fiction story. So nonfiction about their own real aspirations. Fiction, it can be about them, but they're also going to need to make some things up. They're going to need to decide what the character's aspirations are, um, how the character works to achieve them. And then today they're going to be working on the first chapter with the setting and the character's first encounter with another person, just like the first vignette in the house on Mango Street. Okay, so students are independently filling out these pages at Writer's Journal 5.5 for this lesson, this component of the lesson. While they're doing that, the teacher is circulating, just offering supports. They can do that, also do that by giving students some sentence stems for each of the rows, um, and clarifying the prompts, clarifying what they need to be writing in each of those sections of the writer's journal. So when they are done with that, the teacher is going to wrap up with some positive reinforcement for all of their hard work because it's hard to write a story. Um, then after class, the teacher is going to go over Writer's Journal 5.1 and 3, making sure that students understand the difference between similes and metaphors and that they've explained the meaning of figurative language. And they're also going to review 5.5, making sure that they provide positive, supportive feedback to encourage students' ideas for their stories. They can also ask questions or ask them for some more details. And the goal is to help them take the next step in their writing. So, really important that students get some type of feedback on this before they move on to they're going to need that for the next lesson. Okay.
Mhm.
I think that concludes lesson 5.
All right.
So, thank you for watching.
Bye. Thank you.
Let me stop recording.